Good morning. So my name is Marshano Pugisho, a third year student at Zitech University, pursuing Bachelor of Education Arts and Social Science, majoring in English Literature. So today I'm going to talk about topic 2 of our unit, Literature Review, page 0508202023. So today we are going to focus on oral literature and the oral literature is a topic, and then the subtopic is oral narratives. So last time we talked about oral tradition, which we say that oral traditions are beliefs or cultural values that is passed on through a word of mouth from generation to the generation. And today we are going to talk about oral narratives, which are the things that makes up the oral tradition. So here I'm going to introduce the topic and then what you should expect in the topic 2, oral narratives. The topic objectives. Objective, these are the things that you need to capture or understand before the lesson ends. When the lesson ends, you should be able to explain this thing. So in this topic, we are going to interact with narratives, its definition, different types of narrative, and some characteristic of narratives with their importance. But and then the topic objective is by the end of the lesson, the learner should be able to define narratives. That is, what is narrative? Give example of oral narrative with their definition. That is, you give the you understand the different types of narratives. Then state characteristic of oral narratives. Yeah, they have their characteristic. You should state them. State importance of oral narrative. Yeah, the things that makes oral narrative more enjoyable. So I'm going to start with the definition of oral narrative. Oral narratives are prose accounts of human location, events, and situations, some of which exist and others are fiction. What do I mean by the word fiction? Like when they exist, we mean that stories, we have two types of stories, the one which are real and the one which are imaginative, whereby someone just came up with a story and it is told to others. And there are some things that happened, like the story of Luanda Magere. He was a warrior of that community. That is a fiction because it is real. But when you talk about hare and hyena talking, we all know that animals cannot talk. So that is a non-fiction story because it is not something which is real. It's something that someone has just come up with, a story that someone has just imagined and talked about. So, yeah, so oral narrative, there are in two ways, that is real fiction and then non-fiction, which is imaginative. Majority of oral narration are transmitted from one generation to another by the word of mouth. That's why it's called oral narrative. Oral narrative, they are mainly spoken. They are stories that maybe an elderly person they gather the children in the fireplace. As you can see in this picture, there are some people, an elderly person who is just trying to tell a story and they are listening. That is passing the information orally with a word of mouth. Most oral narration in Kenya is read by old people who try to entertain and educate the young people. What do I mean? Like when you see most of the people who tell this story are old people because they have that idea of the stories from our past, like the past life. So they're trying to tell the new generation about the story so that they can also pass them to their children. And that is called oral narrative, passing them from generation to generation. So the next we are going to talk about different example of oral narrative. As we have said, we have different types of oral narratives. One is myth, legend, trickster, fables, ogre, explanatory, and dilemma. I'm going to start with myth. As you all know, myth is something that you believe in. That's something that does not exist, but you believe it does exist. Like, for example, our common myth story is the creation story, whereby we believe that God created this world in 6 days and rested on the seventh day. There is no one who has proved. It's not scientifically proven, but we believe, us as Christian, we believe that this earth was created by God in 6 days and then he rested in the seventh day. That what that is what was written in the Bible, in the script that the old people were explaining. We were born hearing that story. So that is a myth. It's not something that is proven, but something we're hearing and we believe that it happened, even though it's not proven. So next thing is legend narrative. These are narrative that speaks about the heroes and heroine in our community. Example, Luanda Magere. So in legends, these are stories that are told, like whereby when you have a hero or a heroine in your community, those heroes, they are honored by like telling their story. Maybe someone fought a war and won a war. That person will be remembered whereby his stories will be shared from one generation to another. The children will tell their children, and when other children are born, they will be told. So that person is a legend. So it's a legend narrative. Yeah. Next is trickster narrative. Explain about cunning character who tricks people to doing something. So trickster narrative are based on character who are cunning, they're tricking people into doing something. For example, when we say like the story of hare and hyena, like the hare tricks the hyena to doing something. That person has a cunning character whereby he just lied to people or make them do something for them. Yeah, yeah. Then the next is fables. These are stories with the main character being animals. Like when we talk about the hare and hyena, both both characters, the protagonist and the antagonist, they are both animals. So that narrative is called fables because the characters are animals. Next is ogre narrative. These are stories that tell of a beast that is described to be huge in size and capable of changing from one form to another, maybe a human being to a tree, or maybe a tree to a human being. For example, there is a story talks about a young girl who was living in a certain village. Let's say she was living in Mangu village, and then there was a forest called Mangu forest. This is whereby Mangu forest was feared by the villagers. They believe that there is an ogre who could change from maybe being huge to someone beautiful, and then he could just entice you to follow him, and then he's going to eat you. So this girl disobeyed her parents' wish of telling her not to go to that forest. She went there to fetch firewood, and when she was there, she found like a firewood already tied. So she wanted to leave to go back home because she thought she had like she was lucky that day that someone had just collected firewood and forgotten there, but it was not that way. So this girl, when she was trying to lift the firewood, one log started talking, and then the girl peered, and when she peered, that log, like when she was terrified, she dropped the firewood, and that log changed into a big monster. When she saw that, she screamed, and those people who were in the village, they heard her, and then they knew she was in trouble, and then they went to save her before the ogre could eat her alive. So you see, that's a story whereby it's talking about a monster who had changed himself into a log, and then when the girl tried to lift the firewood, it changed back into a monster. You see, that's an ogre narrative. And then next explanatory narrative. These are stories that tell us how something started. Example, why does zebra have one and black white and black crosses? So these are things that explain about something. Like when you see, like when people say that maybe a hen always fear a hawk because it took the hawk's razor blade, and then the razor blade got lost, so the hawks decided to be taking the chickens babies. So you see, that is something that we see. So explanatory narrative is trying to explain where that narrative came from. Next is dilemma. This is a narrative that places the reader in a state of suspense and leave numerous questions in their mind. Like a story like dilemma, it leaves you in a state whereby you are wondering what happened next. Did that person die? Did that person was she rescued? Like that state whereby you're asking yourself so many questions and you can't get the answer because it's a dilemma story. You have to you have to answer the question with a lot of thoughts in your mind. So that is a dilemma stories. And with that, we conclude with the example of narratives. So I'm going to talk about the characteristic of narratives. First is opening formula. So when you see like a story, when you're hearing a stories, there is always an opening formula whereby the narrator will start or the storyteller will start by saying story, and then the the people hearing the audience will respond story come. So story, that is an open formula that is introducing the audience to the story. They are coming into the mind, like their mind, they're prepared to hearing the story. When they hear story, they are curious to know what's going to happen. What is this story going to talk about? Yeah, so characteristic of stories, one is story, opening formula. Importance of opening formula. First is engage the audience. This is whereby when you say story, the audience will be curious. They want to know, yeah, which story are we going to hear today? So they are very attentive. Next is make introduction of the narrator to the audience. So the narrator will make the introduction to the story. Maybe I'll say story. Today we are going to talk about hair and Diana. So the audience will get the hint to what we are going to talk about today. So you're introducing the audience to the story. Next is shift the audience from reality world to fantasy. This is whereby when the audience hear story, their mind will shift from where they were to the fantasy world. So they will start imagining how Hare and Diana was doing this and that. So that is shifting their mind from where they are to the world of fantasy where they're imagining things. Yeah. So the next characteristic is closing formula. It is the sentence utilized prior to ending a tale. This is whereby the storyteller uses these words, the closing formula, to end the story, whereby he can say, and that marks the end of my story. That means the audience will be able to know that this story has an end and it has ended because the closing formula has been told by the narrator. And that makes the audience maybe to clap or to remove themselves from the fantasy world and just come to the real world and imagining and stop imagining things and now focus on what they have learned. Next is significance of closing formula. This it formally declares the story has ended. When you say, and that marks the end of my story, the audience will be able to know there is no continuation of the story, but the story has come to an end of that story. Next, relax the audience concentration. Since the audience were curious, since the audience were listening, they were keen, they wanted to know more about that story. When they hear that closing formula, that marks the end of my story, the audience will be able to relieve themselves from the keenness. They will be able now to come back into asking questions, maybe how they are curious to know why this person did this. Yeah, they are now talking to the narrator. They're now asking question to the narrator. That is the concentration now as ended because they were concentrating so that they may listen to the story. Next is shift the audience from the fantasy world to the reality world. This is whereby the audience are able now to come from the fantasy world whereby they were listening to the story, they were hearing, but now they just want to come into the reality world and ask more about the story. So at the end of this notes, I've given a link of of a story whereby you can go and watch it on YouTube. You can just click the link and go and watch it. And then I've given an assignment whereby you can try and attempt this assignment. Do it, answer the questions, and I will mark it. So, and this comes to the end of our lesson today. I hope you have grabbed something. I hope you have understand about the oral narratives. And when I ask a question, you're able to answer it correctly without any difficulties. I hope the session was enjoyed. Thank you for listening. That's the end of our class. Thank you.